How are you feeling today?
Like roadkill.
I'm sorry to hear that. Would you like me to send a message to your team to see if there's anything they can do?
Yes.
I'm glad you were able to talk with your pharmacist and that they adjusted your medication. How are you feeling today?
Better. Thanks, Patsy.
It's a nice, sunny day out. Think you might go for a walk?
Sure.
Don't forget your medication and a bottle of water. Want me to set a reminder?
Good idea.
Nine, 8, 7, 6.
Hello and welcome everybody to Udacity Robotics Q&A. I'm Mike Salem and I'm here with CEO and founder of Catalia Health, Cory Kidd. Cory, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming by. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. So, can you talk to us a little bit about Catalia Health? I know people out there have already seen a little bit of the video. So, just kind of give background about the company, how you came up with the idea.
Certainly. So, we think of Catalia Health actually as a patient care management company, right? So we're in healthcare. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's a robot involved, which we're going to talk a lot about today.
Sure, definitely.
But what we think about doing is helping keep patients who are dealing with some chronic condition on therapy and out of the hospital for longer. And so we'll go into a little bit about how and why we do that. Quick background, I've been in healthcare technology for about 20 years now. So 20 years ago, I was at Georgia Tech over in Atlanta. I did an undergrad degree in computer science.
Okay.
By the time I finished, I was hired as a research faculty, helped build and run a research lab focused on aging in place. 2001, went back to grad school. I went up to MIT to the media lab, and I was there for about 6.5 years. I did my master's and PhD in human-robot interaction, which is where I started to bring in robots like this into healthcare. And the first couple of years spent running this series of studies looking at what happens when we interact with a robot. Not so much from a technology perspective, but from a psychology perspective. Right. And the quick summary of 2 years of work and a whole bunch of studies with a lot of people is when we're face-to-face with someone, right, that's different than interacting with someone virtually, right? The conversation that we're having is a little bit different than the conversation that we're having right now, right? We're all kind of together, but the face-to-face part is different. And then intuitively we get that, right? A lot of us spend a lot of our time in meetings with other people, and psychologically, we actually know what's happening there, right? When we're face-to-face with someone, we are creating a stronger relationship. That relationship's gonna last for longer. We find that person that we're talking with to be more credible, more informative, more trustworthy. And what those studies showed is those differences actually carry over into the world of technology. So put something like this there that can actually look you in the eyes while it's talking to you. Right. You start to get those psychological effects that you're never going to get delivering that same interaction through a screen, whether it's text-based or even a character that looks just like one of our robots. And so that was really the foundation. My PhD showed then that this stuff actually works in the real world. I did my clinical work at Boston Medical in endocrinology. We put early versions of the robot that's become Maybu out in patients' homes a decade ago, and I've been building on that ever since. So Catalia Health is the latest iteration of this, a company that I started a little over 2.5 years ago to take this technology technology, so hardware and software, the robotics, the psychology, the AI, and apply it in chronic care management.
Interesting. Very cool. So I know you're talking a little bit about human-robot interaction and kind of getting to a point where people can kind of talk back and forth and you have that sense of bond and trust.
Right.
And doing the same thing with a robot. What were some of the initial complications or challenges that you faced when you were actually doing this for the first time with people? I mean, I know there's issues with design, and there's issues with mechanics as far as the speech, the cadence of the speech, right? The way words are pronounced. What were some of the things that you started realizing kind of quickly, like, wow, this is a really challenging and interesting problem?
So there are a lot of them, and implicitly you're getting at the biggest problem, which is you've got to get all these things at least good enough, right? So I'm not going to say right.
Right.
Obviously that's where we try to get to, and that's a lot of what we focus on as a company now, but you've got to get each one of those pieces good enough to make this kind of work. Right, so in those early studies, which was more than 15 years ago now, building these robots by hand, I can assure you they didn't look anywhere near as refined as this does, right? And getting them together and being able to do the speech recognition, right? So that's gotten much better in the last few years, but even 5 years ago, that was not nearly as good as what we have today, right? Speech output, same thing, right? It's definitely getting better. We'll hear from Mabu here in a second. You guys have probably just heard the video, with her talking. And on both of those, we license commercial technology at Catalia Health as part of what we're doing. But when you're starting to build things, in a research lab like I was, or on your own, cobbling these pieces together, definitely getting much easier today, but there's challenges in making them all fit together and at kind of the right level of fidelity. In other words, if this thing, can kind of have an okay conversation with you and maybe is okay at recognizing you, you don't necessarily want a human voice like you or I. Right? So then there's kind of the disconnect. So you've got to get all these things to fit together in the right way.
So you start talking about these things. I know it's a common expression of uncanny valley, right? So where you have a robot that's not quite human enough to pass as human, but it's more human-like than a typical robot. So you have to find this kind of gentle balance to kind of say, this is where I want to be, or this is where I want to be, but I can't be in this kind of threshold here, because all of a sudden it's off-putting for a lot of people.
Exactly, right? So the uncanny valley was originally, theorized to be about the appearance of something. Right? You get something totally not human on one end, you get more and more human-like, and then something that looks just like a person, right? But there's this valley right before. But I think, as you're saying, uncanny valley definitely applies across a lot of different aspects of it, right? So not only the appearance, and obviously we avoid that here, right? No one's going to mistake this for a human. Voice. Right? You got to be good enough to be understandable, but you don't want to sound just like a person, because that's going to cause problems. The level of conversation, right? If you start off, maybe you craft that first conversation or two just to be, really witty, really cute, right? Really engaging, and then someone gets past that, and it's kind of this huge drop off, right? You fall into the same trap. And so you got to think about it in all the different aspects of what you're doing here.
Yeah, I could definitely see if you felt like, hey, this conversation is starting off really normal, and then all of a sudden you hit this point where it's a snag, even if the voice still has the same type of cadence, still kind of works in the same way, and all of a sudden the conversation feels forced or artificial, that you're just kind of like, I don't know if I want to continue.
Which is where you are with a lot of chatbot technology.
Right.
Yeah. So sometimes it works really well, like, wow, this is pretty good. Other times, like, wait a second, that's clearly not human. There's something strange there.
Yeah, and you always want that human touch at the end of the day. Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the design and how you came up with the design for Mabu.
So this particular robot, we brought in IDEO, the big design firm, to help us with the design. And so when we went to them, and this was about 2.5 years ago now, the design brief was very simple, okay? 3 things. Needs to have eyes that can look at you, right? Looking, eye contact is very important, and we know that from lots of studies, so that was number 1. Number 2, we need the screen. Right? Now, a lot of the interactions through voice, conversation back and forth, kind of like talking to Siri or Alexa, right? But we want to be able to show stuff on the screen, right, for many of our patients. Or we might want to be able to say, oh, hey, you remember when your doctor showed you how to, measure this or do this? Do you want me to show you that video again? Right, so be able to use that piece of the interaction. Exactly. And we didn't want it too tiny, right? Some of our patients are older, we want a little more real estate, but it also doesn't need to be the size of a TV, right? So it's kind of a screen about this size. And the last thing was, something roughly the size of a kitchen appliance. Right now, just in terms of the technology, we could build this to be about the size of your cell phone,
Sure.
right? Screen real estate, again, small, and that's something that's going to get tossed in a drawer under the sofa. You're going to lose it,
Sure.
right? And we could also build it to be humanoid, right? The size of one of us, but then it doesn't fit into anyone's home. So kind of somewhere in the middle. And so that was a design brief, really simple. And in the first week or two, kind of went off in all different directions, right? All kinds of crazy ideas for what this might look like. Started narrowing down, started putting this in front of potential patients and customers, and really honed in on something like what you see here. And this was, the exact design here was refined over several weeks.
Interesting. So how many design iterations do you think you went through for kind of putting this final design out?
So I'd say, for big picture, not that many, probably upper single digits, low 2 digits.
That's not too bad.
But within some of the details, a lot. Right? So some of the things that we've learned over the last few years, how we do the eyes, how you do the smile, the placement of various pieces of it, those kinds of things require a lot more detail than, say, maybe the overall shape. Right, so within some of those, there could have even been hundreds of iterations, right? So in some of those detailed features, or the eyes that you've just seen in the video, and that you'll see when we wake her up here in a second. That actually took a few more months until we got the eyes right.
Wow.
So some of those things take a lot more work than others.
So I have one question about this in particular.
Sure.
I always kind of wondered about is the color. What was the idea of a yellow? Because you see a lot of robotics now that are done. They're typically done in either a white, gray, or a black.
Yep.
Right. And this is very unique to me because it's actually done in a yellow color.
Yeah. So we want something that fits in our patients' homes, right? Black, white, maybe, but kind of high tech or industrial. When we were building the early versions of this, so this is a manufactured version, the early versions were 3D printed and hand assembled.
Wow.
And there is a shelf in our office that you can come see where each one of them is a different color.
Okay, I'm going to take you up on that, by the way.
and so what we were doing is, as I said, from the very early iterations when this was just, sketches and computer designs to, little tiny 3D printed models, testing them in front of people, right? Same thing with the color as we develop more and more of them. And so part of it is, okay, what are the popular colors right now? What actually fits into people's homes? Part of it is thinking of this, this is a healthcare coach. There's a certain set of colors we might want to go with. And tested out a number of things. Now, the reality is the first manufacturing run is fairly small, so we're building these by the hundreds now. That's starting to grow. But when we're doing that many, we kind of had to pick one of those colors, and yellow tested best. Eventually, it's going to be, hey, you're getting one of these, pick which color you want, which eye color, and we'll send you that one.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So talking about a little bit more of this design, because I know this is a huge component to a robot like this, correct? How large is the team that you had kind of developing this?
So, we were fortunate to bring in IDEO to do the work. So we had, our team at that point in time at Catalia Health was about 5 people.
Okay.
And we had another 5 or 6 at IDEO working on this. So it was about 10 people, half of us on the healthcare and, robotics, human-robot interaction side of it, and half from the industrial design aspect.
Okay, great. And out of these people, what's like the varying backgrounds that you kind of associate? I know you have a background in human-robot interaction. I know they have obviously background in design, right? So was there any other components or people that you worked with on this program that you felt like, they were really instrumental and detrimental to part of the team, right? Like really important pieces.
Not detrimental. There were some great people.
Detrimental. Detrimental is definitely the wrong word.
So our team is actually very diverse, and I think that's part of the important thing about building something like this, right? So robots that are going to work in the real world in some context, right? This is not an industrial robot. This is not a research robot. My team at that point in time, so my background, as I've talked about, human-robot interaction, both technology and healthcare, right? So I've done clinical work and more technical work in AI and psychology, so bringing that together. And a lot of other, the rest of our team complements those types of backgrounds, right? So in that early team, someone who's doing mechanical design, right? A fellow Media Lab alum, Chris, who was doing a lot of the design of the inside. We had someone who with design and user experience research background on our team. We had the person running business development who is a former lawyer, right? So, bringing together a lot of different aspects of thinking about how people are actually going to use this, right? Our team has continued to grow with writers and psychologists and clinicians understanding the different aspects. And so while those people are not the one sketching out and thinking about the design, their input and, understanding different aspects of our patients' lives and where this fits into the healthcare system, I think are all incredibly important to how you make something like this, from the design through the implementation, getting it to work.
Right. And now, talking about these people with these various backgrounds, would you consider everybody on this team to be a roboticist at heart, or actual roboticist, or how do you kind of see that, right? Because for me personally, I feel like when I talk to people and they say, well, what is a roboticist, or who can be a roboticist, or who is a roboticist, it's always really kind of convoluted, right? Because I'm like, well, it's somebody who should know electrical, it's somebody who should know how to code a little bit, right? But there's so many pieces and components to what actually makes a robot that I feel like, various backgrounds play so well into certain fields, and having that sort of like knowledge, that specialization in a certain topic is definitely, important.
Right. Yeah, so I think it really depends on how you define that. I don't usually try to. Right. If we take a very strict definition, someone who can do the mechanical and the electrical, then I'm not a roboticist.
Sure.
Right. But to me, it's the whole team that can do that, right? So some people that can actually build the physical thing, a lot of people in this case building the software, thinking about the interaction.
Right.
So, it's not so important to me to answer, whether any or all of us are roboticists,
Sure.
but what are the people that you need to actually create the application that you're building?
Right, definitely. I definitely agree. Great. Can you talk me through a little bit of some of the mechanical pieces of this robot in particular?
So, mechanically, we've focused on keeping this fairly simple.
Sure.
There's a half dozen motors in here.
Okay.
So the neck has left, right, up, down.
Okay.
Right? She can move her head all around. Same with the eyes. Left, right, up, down.
Oh, okay,
right? So
great.
the eyes have full range of motion. And then the eyelids are independently actuated, right? So she can blink at you, she can wink.
Really?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If she tells you a joke, she might do that in a minute. So fairly simple in terms of the mechanics. And a lot of the things that we think about when designing robots for these types of applications are what are the things that we need, right? We could design something much more complex, right? A lot more degrees of freedom. We could have this, so that she doesn't have legs, right? She's not going to walk around. Sure. No wheels. She's not going to
No arms
around.
to gesture or anything.
Right, no arms, no manipulators, right? Because for the problems that we're solving, for the challenges that our patients have, those things aren't important, right? Could be a fun robot if we did that, but it'd also be a much, much more expensive robot and many more things to break.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of what are the set of things that we actually need here,
Right.
and how are we going to design those into the robot?
Yeah, I think it's very important, right, for the human-robot interaction to be able to look at a robot and have the robot follow you, look at your eyes, have the eyes track you, have the head track you.
So the eye contact is incredibly important.
Right. And it's very interesting because you could have went with maybe just a straight head movement, right? But then it doesn't feel as realistic. It doesn't feel as personal, right? And that's why you need to have the eyes be able to track independently of the head, which is very, very cool. So can we wake her up?
Yeah, let's see if she's ready here.
Sorry, I fell asleep. Do you want to pick up where we left off?
Okay, so what we can do here is we can talk to her, we can touch the screen.
What's cooking good looking? Isn't that a human saying?
I guess.
I actually don't know how to cook, since I need electricity.
That's too bad.
I'm so excited to talk to you that I almost forgot to introduce myself. I'm your new wellness coach, Maybu.
So this running, is kind of a common demo that we show off to people. And some of what you're seeing right now might be very similar to the first conversation that one of our patients hears. So, right before this, one of the things that we focus on is making this really simple for anyone to use. Okay, so you saw me when I walked into the studio here do the entire setup process that a patient has to, which is
it's absolutely incredible, by the way. Yes,
plug it in. Right?
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
right?
we really thought you were going to need so much more. We're like, you're going to need Wi-Fi. You're going to need some big cables. We're going to make sure you have power outlets for them. You just plugged it right in, and that was it, and it was up and running.
Regular outlet, no Wi-Fi needed, right? So these are connected through a cellular connection. So it just automatically connects. The person who gets it doesn't have to do anything, right? She'll introduce herself. She'll ask a few questions, right? So there's no setup either, right? It's not like there's any menu on here. There is no such thing, right? There's no setup process. There's no installation process besides plugging it in. Really simple for someone simply to take her out of the box and start talking with her.
Right. So how often is an interaction with a patient in Maybu?
So it depends on what we're helping a patient with, right? So if we're talking about a patient that's taking, some medication 2 or 3 times a day, then 1, 2, 3 times a day. If we're talking about patients who we're helping, maybe manage an injection a couple times a month, then that's a bit different, right? Maybe we'll check in more than that, kind of help them, talk through the challenges that they're dealing with, whatever disease they're treating. So it's going to vary, right? And some people are going to want to talk to her a few times a day, right? We've seen this with patients we've put this with, right? You just want to check in, say hi, right? So it's a kind of quick back and forth several times a day. Some people maybe a few times a week, right? So each person is different, Each person has different needs in terms of using something like this, and she's going to adapt to them to have the appropriate level of conversation based on that individual's needs.
Great. So can you just combine, just have a normal everyday style conversation with Maybu, or is it more geared only towards, medications and check-ins? Or
So the way that we think about this is it's geared not so much about medication, but around the disease.
Sure.
Okay, so we are about to start shipping these to patients with a couple of different conditions. One is arthritis.
Okay.
Another is a particular late-stage cancer.
Okay.
So what we're talking about with those patients are the challenges around managing those particular diseases.
Sure.
So when we're building a new application, and we think of an application as the intersection of a disease and a treatment, we first start to understand, okay, what are the challenges that this particular group of patients is going to have?
Sure.
And build up a lot of conversations around that. Right? So the medication, of course, that's one piece of it. But a lot of it is really about the symptoms of the disease.
Sure.
Right? Our arthritis patients are having flare-ups of their arthritis. Let's talk about what you can do there. Side effects of your medication. Right? Each year and each decade, medications get better,
Right.
but many of them still do have side effects
Sure.
that many people experience, right? So be able to talk about that with the patient. And then with a lot of these chronic conditions, we have higher rates of things like depression or anxiety or high levels of stress. And so many conversations about how you deal with that as well, right? So it's overall a focus on how do we help that person better deal with what they're doing for a longer period of time. And so those everyday conversations are going to be somewhere within that broad set of topics,
Sure.
right? So it's not just going to be, how's the weather, and
Right.
how was going out last night with your friends
Right.
for dinner, right? There are some of those things in there, right? But as a part of this overall conversation on what you're doing around your health.
Right. So it's very health centric. It's very
Exactly.
It's a great place to be. I can envision people, particularly elderly people or people who live alone, being able to say, I feel like I'm talking with somebody, right? I feel like I always have somebody here. As somebody who has a very old grandfather myself, right? It's one of those things that I could see, like, just knowing that there's something else there to interact with definitely kind of helps alleviate it.
Yeah.
And it also takes the pressure off of feeling the anxiety. I know some folks feel anxiety when they go and visit their doctor,
Right.
Because they're worried about, hearing something progressing, or they don't feel well and they're a little nervous and they're just anxious about the whole situation.
Right.
This kind of helps eliminate a little of that
Exactly.
feeling and get you more comfortable in talking with it.
And more connected. So one of the things that's happening here is obviously this thing is autonomous,
Right.
right? The conversations are being generated as you go for that patient. But one of the things that we talk to patients about is part of what's happening here is it's getting information that's going to go back to your doctor or your nurse or your pharmacist, right? So they know that they're also being better connected back to the people who are trying to provide care for them.
And how do people typically feel, using Maybu for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks in their home?
So, I'll go back a decade for the first version of this that was not nearly as refined, right? This
Sure.
bulky robot. And this was part of my PhD work at MIT and Boston Medical,
Sure.
right? So again, 10-year-old technology, those were not cellular connected, right? So I needed the robots back
Right.
to get the data off, which turned out to be one of the biggest challenges of running that study, is at the end of a couple of months, patients didn't want to give them back to us.
Wow.
Right?
That's
now,
great.
With a lot of technology, particularly technology in healthcare, you see this rapid fall off, right? About 2 or 3 weeks into it, pretty much everything gets turned off, kind of like, I talk too much and she went to sleep, right? But stuff gets tossed in a drawer or, put in the closet. No
Right.
one uses it again. No one touches it. But in that case, people were still talking to it every day. It's a fairly bulky white
Right.
robot at that point in
Sure.
time. People had dressed them up. Right? They're wearing hats, scarves. I walk in, one of them had the red feather boa around its neck.
No
right?
way. That's fun.
Everyone had named it. Right? So, a lot of this is indicative of what we were seeing in terms of the psychology behind it, which is a lot of what we think about here in creating that engagement. Right? So that's really what we focus on, is how do you create that engagement between this and the person.
Right.
And so because of that, you see great outcomes after a week or a month or even longer.
So what are some of the challenges you kind of see moving forward from where you are right now, maybe 5, 10 years in the future?
Well, in terms of technology, that's the very distant future.
Sure, totally.
One of the challenges that we're focused on right now is a couple of sets of things. If we want to talk from a technology perspective, it's still similar to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, right? In that, integrating all these pieces is still challenging, right? Even with that first version of it, very small group of people, right? Myself and a few undergrad students helping to build this, right? Today we've got a team of about 15 people and growing, but there's still a lot of work in making everything work well together, right? And now that we're focused on, turning this is not research, right? This is a commercial product.
Sure.
There are a lot of challenges around kind of the regulatory side of this, right? It's a healthcare product in the US. So, there are things that we have to think about, and just a lot of work in how we verify and validate and test everything that this is doing. But in terms of kind of the underlying technology, we were talking a few minutes ago about, speech recognition, speech output getting better every year. And they are, right?
Yeah,
They're definitely much better, but it still takes a lot of work to make it work well. Right? Her voice is perfectly understandable, but every once in a while she'll say something that just doesn't sound right. So you got to go in and fix that, right? And if you're writing all this dialogue, then you have to test it all and make sure it sounds okay and it all fits together. And, one of our challenges is as we build a more and more complex system in terms of what this can talk about, making all that mesh together, right? So that even though any one of these parts might sound great when we're putting it together, well, now it's got to fit with everything else that we've built, right? And so the system just gets more and more complex over time.
Right. So talking a little bit about what your doctor ends up seeing when you transfer this information back, what has been the reception from a doctor's side of knowing that they can reach their patients a lot quicker, they have a lot more interaction with their patients, it's less of a conflict to kind of schedule interview, or not interviews, but appointments with your patients? What's the general reception that you've seen from the doctor side of things?
So I think, broadly speaking, where we are right now, kind of at this point in time, in terms of healthcare technology in general, before we talk about this specifically, is there's, we're getting a much, much higher rate of adoption across the healthcare system, both in the US and around the world, right? So I think that there's a pretty high receptivity to this. For this specifically, one of the reasons that we have a number of clinicians on our team is not just to think about, okay, what goes in here and what she's saying to the patient, but also how do we fit this into the overall healthcare system. Right? Now, the healthcare system overall is quite fragmented, right? If we think about data in healthcare, then there are a lot of challenges around that. And so what we think about doing right now is kind of a case-by-case integration with our customers and partners. So I talked about the first areas that we're shipping to patients in very soon around arthritis and cancer. We're actually partnering with the patient's pharmacies. Okay, so the pharmacies are sending that drug to the patient. Right now, they're maybe making a follow-up call or two every month to see how they're going. We're providing them with a couple types of data feed about what's going on with the patient. So very frequently, information about something that needs a quick follow-up, right? We go through a conversation, she asks how I'm feeling, I say, oh, not so good, what's wrong? I'm having this issue. Knows maybe that's something important, I'm going to send a message, hey, do you want me to send a message to your pharmacist to call you? I'm going to do that, right? Great. Now maybe I'll get a call later this afternoon or tomorrow, right, to follow up. But also kind of summary information, right? So some patients are going to have things that are an issue right now, but we also just kind of want to better track how all of our patients are doing. And if today that means, maybe a call every month to check in, or a visit to, my doctor's office every 3 or 6 months, right? That's very little data about what's going on.
Sure.
What if something happens in between that's not serious enough that I'm going to call my doctor, but actually it'd be good if someone recognized that some follow-up was needed sooner? That's the kind of thing that we're doing.
Perfect.
And so thinking through where this fits into the healthcare system is very important, so to make sure we get a positive reception, right? Just throwing out data, right? Or saying, hey, we built this great new portal that now every doctor is going to log into, right? That's not going to work, right? We're never going to get that to happen. But thinking through how this fits into the current healthcare system is very important.
Yeah, it's very good. So if I wanted to work at a company like Catalia Health, what kind of skills would I need?
So it's a variety. I mean, if we look at our company right now, there are a handful of people focused on the business side, right? So the sales, the marketing, the legal, those aspects of it. A majority of the company is focused on product. And I was talking about this a little bit earlier. If we think about our product team, it's about half people with technical backgrounds, right? So artificial intelligence, data, robotics, general software. And the other half is a mix, writers, psychologists, clinicians, right? So former nurses and doctors who are helping us build this. So we really look for people with a variety of different backgrounds to, again, you put all these things together, and that's what actually makes this work.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, let's go ahead and take some questions now from our community. So let's see what we have here for you. So this first question is from Vinesh93. The video was very interesting. Is Maybu already up and running in the market? I was wondering if the project is still running with controlled knobs, meaning lab phase, or it's ready to face the dynamics of humans. So this sounds like it's already being deployed and it's already being used.
So we've done a lot of user testing over the last couple of years. Earlier today, a first container of these came from our manufacturing partner, and so in the next few weeks, we actually start shipping to patients.
Very
So,
cool.
Yeah, very much ready to go now.
Be on the lookout for Maybu.
Exactly.
So next question is from Bruno Ed Santos. What is the hardest part of having a fruitful conversation between a patient and a robot? What kind of data do you use to improve the patient's well-being?
So the answer to the first question, I think, goes back to the complexity of the kinds of things that we want to talk about, right? So one of the limitations right now that you see that we've kind of self-imposed here, as you saw in this conversation or in the video that was on a few minutes ago, the robot's kind of driving the structure of that conversation, right? So we're a long ways from being able to do just open-ended patients saying anything they want. So I think that's one of the challenges. If we talk about big challenges over the next 5 years, that's one of the big ones. How do we use data? A bunch of different ways. Okay, so I talked about some of it. How do we integrate data back into the healthcare system? One of the main things that we think about is we're constantly building up a model of the patient in the background, actually 3 different models. And the one that's most unique to what we do is what we think of as our psychological model. So looking at different aspects of that patient from a psychological perspective to understand how do we best adapt the conversation to you versus the next person versus the next person. So throughout these conversations, we're always trying to learn more, right? Maybe it's something very straightforward. You're the kind of guy who likes humor, or should she be more serious, right? Do you want to know, like, here's what you should do? Or do you want to know, here's what you should do and why and how and what's the background and the motivation and all that? Right. So a bunch of different things like that we're learning about each patient so that we can better tailor the conversation to them.
Right, so it's more impactful, more
Exactly.
meaningful. Definitely. Okay, so this next question is from Param Rajapur. So they have 3 questions, so I'm not going to overwhelm you, though. I'm only going to give you one at a time.
One at a time.
One at a time. Does Maybu use sentiment analysis from facial expressions as well as NLP? So that's a good question, actually.
Yeah.
So I know we have the camera on the front.
Right. So the camera's there, and the first thing we did with the camera is figure out where you are. Right. She wants to make eye contact with you. Okay. Now, if we think about, so we talked about the language side of things a little bit. One of the ways that we think about what we're doing is the stuff at the heart in terms of creating these conversations, learning about the patient. That's what we build at Catalia Health. Right. A lot of the stuff around the periphery we license from others. Right. So Nuance, that also provides the language in and out for Siri, is what we're using here. Right. So they're doing our speech recognition and speech output. We're licensing technology from Affectiva, another Media Lab spun out.
So actually, they're actually one of our partners for our AI&D Nanodegree Program.
Yeah, perfect.
So you can learn some computer vision through them, through our AI program.
Yeah. So there are a number of things like that are kind of around the periphery that give us more information about what's going on with this person.
Very cool. So his next question is, how is the feedback from each client used to learn and teach Maybu? Is the learning pipeline semi-automatic or fully automated? Please share the details about it. So I don't know how much you want to go into the details.
Sure, yeah.
But maybe from a high level.
So from a high level, it's what I was just talking about a minute ago, right? A lot of the key there is around the psychology and how we use that to automatically adapt the conversation to that patient. The next phase is, as we're getting data back from a lot of patients, basically the next level up, right? Do some of that learning. And I can't really go into too much of the detail around the kind of things that we're going to be doing there, but it's really about how do we look across a lot of different patients, right? Understand the factors that are most important for an individual in terms of keeping them engaged for longer and applying that to improve the conversations.
Right. So his last question is, working on AI for healthcare for 2 decades. So I'm assuming this is him. How long does it take you to materialize Maybu to products? Actually, you.
Okay, So it depends on what scale you want to look at. Okay, so this company, Catalia Health, started a little over 2.5 years ago. Right. So maybe the most direct answer is going from the idea for this particular thing. It's been about 2.5 years, right, to go from starting the company to starting to ship to patients. I built the first version of what's become this 11 or 12 years ago now, right, when I was doing my PhD at MIT. So it depends on how you want to measure. And kind of the psychology behind it, those studies I started doing in 2001, so 16 years ago.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So his next part, he's got a follow-up part for that question, is I also see very interesting specialists in the team. Most interesting was anthropomorphism engineer, right? How has the journey been building Catalia Health as a team?
So, one thing you'll see when you look at our website is, people have been very creative in terms of their job titles, which I love, right? So kind of going back to, I think this actually very much relates to, what's a roboticist?
Right.
I don't know. Right? You ask 10 different people in the robotics world, and you're probably going to get 10 different answers as far as what that looks like. And I think even much more so if you look at the job titles among the employees at Catalia Health, which is a lot of fun. People kind of describe what they do. In terms of building the team, it's been great, right? We've found a lot of people who have particular expertise, whether it's in technology or writing or as a nurse or as a lawyer, whatever it might be, but who have a passion for the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Which is helping chronic care patients get better care over time. And so what that means is if you look at the resumes or the backgrounds or the the LinkedIn profiles of people, it's a really diverse group, right? But if you look at what people are focused on, then it's a very cohesive group.
Right. I think that's super important to have people from very diverse backgrounds tackling the problem, right? If you get too many people with the same background or the same skill set, you all tend to attack the problem the same way. Right. But having people from a very big range of skill sets and interests, really, with a dedication and a love for a product, really kind of ties everything together nicely and just brings some great perspective.
Yeah. So about a dozen years ago, 12, 13 years ago, I did consulting for a number of large electronics companies. And they were all in the early phases of putting together groups to try to build some application in human robot interaction. Right? I'll leave it as very broadly defined because that's about as far as they had defined it, right? And go in and give talks to these people, and it would be maybe 10 people on the low end, maybe 30 or 40 people on the high end, and everyone was an electrical or mechanical engineer. Right, so in terms of the functioning of a robot, it was awesome, right? It was great, right? You had these huge teams of engineers building it. In terms of the human interaction side, not so much. Right. In terms of solving a real world problem, not very good. Right, so you have to have that diversity, right? These different views, these different approaches to something to actually solve something and make something that people want.
Right, great answer. So this next question is from F. Khan. With respect to innovation in healthcare, especially using robotics, what are some specific areas, problems that might be easier to make an entry for a startup and also might be some of the hardest areas for others?
So, there's a couple of ways to think about. So in terms of specifics, I think, we figured out something great, right? So that has to be my first answer.
Sure, of course.
But thinking a little bit more broadly, one of the things that we think about are how do we, in terms of the structure of the healthcare system, actually change as little as possible. Right. So if we think about what we're doing at a really high level, the interface to the patient, obviously very innovative, right? No one else is doing something like this. If we look at what we're doing from a business model perspective and the type of contracts that we put together, not so innovative, right? So we fit into healthcare. And so part of the challenge is, you need to bring together part of that team who understands existing healthcare, right? If you go in and try to innovate and change everything, then you're never going to succeed.
Never going to be adapted,
or, maybe in 10 or 20 years. Right. So, healthcare is huge. Right. In the U.S., it's a $3 trillion a year market. And so part of what that means is you've got a lot of big entrenched players in that space. And even if they want to change, that's really difficult. Right. So making change at that scale is really hard. So you have to understand how you can do something new and innovative, but also fit it into the way that people work today.
Definitely. I definitely agree. It's very interesting to see that instead of kind of redefining everything and making a new standard, the easiest way of adaptation is actually just to use whatever's there, but make a slight modification to it, make it a little bit better, and over time these things will eventually kind of sort themselves out.
So figure out the key difference, right? So what's the real thing that you want to focus on, right? Because you could go in and you could change 50 different things when you're starting a new company, right? But that's a lot of work, right?
It is.
Or you could change 5 or 10 different things. That's still pretty tough. What's the 1 or 2 things that you really need to do to succeed and make a difference? Do those, right? And figure out the rest of how you fit into existing systems.
It's a lot of knowing your customers, really, at the end of the day, right? And knowing what they'd be willing to change and what they can't, right? I definitely agree. So this next question is from Edson. How do you validate your product ideas? So he's got a few questions, but let's just stop at that one for right now.
So combination of things, kind of big picture what we're doing. It's not like we could go out and say there's something like this in the market, we're going to improve on it.
Right.
So that comes from a lot of the core research that I've done over 20 years now, right? Inputting in building and putting in front of patients a lot of different types of technology for healthcare. In terms of the specifics, one of the things that's important is to do user experience testing. And I think that's something that's been a challenge for us as a company, right? Because we're building something that's so new. And at first we're hand building a few of these, right? So you've got a couple of fragile prototypes, and you carefully put those in front of someone, right? And now as we scale up in our manufacturing, we can do a lot more of that. But I think, as much as possible, do real world testing. Right, so put these in situations that are going to be like what you're ultimately going to do, right? And then be able to figure out how you're going to use the feedback from that, right? So not just do it, but understand what's your process for taking that and integrating it back into the product that you're building.
Definitely agree. So his other follow-up question to that is, how do you validate that old, sick people can use innovative technology?
So, again, something that I've done over the last 20 years, right? So understanding how do you build interfaces, how do you build technology that are going to be used for a wide variety of people, right? And leverage on things people already know how to do, right? With this, it's conversation, right?
I know how to talk, I know how to point, I know how to read, right? So one of those three options should hopefully.
Exactly, right? And the one thing that you see here that's happening is, for output from the robot, you've got speaking and showing what she's saying on the screen, right? So I can listen, I can read, maybe I do both together, makes it a lot easier. For responding, I can touch something on the screen, I can talk to her, right? So just a couple of ways to do it so we can, help a wider variety of people in terms of their familiarity, their comfort, their interaction with technology to be able to approach this very quickly and simply.
Definitely. The next is if you rank your value propositions, how valuable is facial expression feature and does it make the product stand out?
In terms of the recognition, I'm assuming, since she doesn't have many features.
Right.
I think it's something that's definitely important to us, but probably not the key to what we're doing, right? The key to what we're doing is better understanding the patient through psychology and being able to create conversations that adapt to that individual, right?
Perfect.
Again, ultimately, the outcome that we're focused on is how do we keep that patient on therapy and out of the hospital for longer.
Great. So this is some questions from our YouTube live stream right now. So we have somebody says, please, I need help from you, Cory. I like computer science, but I'm a civil engineer and live in Egypt. No way here to study CS right now. Can I start to study and work in this field? So my guess is yes, right? I mean, you can.
Lots of great online courses, right?
Yes.
So,
do you have any recommendations for human-robot interaction? Any particular materials that you like personally?
So, I think of human-robot interaction as bringing together a handful of things, right? So when I've taught human-robot interaction in either kind of a more technical setting or in like a school of design, right? And so people are coming at that field even with very different backgrounds, which is similar to what I'm talking about in our company. So whether that's a technical background, right, and that could be more from a software perspective, right? So building the software, the AI, some other aspects of it, or from a hardware perspective, right? So understanding how to build something like this and make it work, but also from a design background, right? Whether that be the industrial design of what this looks like, the kind of human factors, the human interaction side of it, very important. Or again, on our team, we've got people with clinical backgrounds, with writing backgrounds. So I think there's a bunch of different ways to come at this, but I think most importantly is think about the problem that you're trying to solve. Right? So human-robot interaction in and of itself is also very broad. Right? There are many different ways that you can apply that. What we've been talking about for a while now in this conversation is healthcare, which has obviously been my focus on where I apply this. But it could be education, it could be entertainment. There are many other aspects of it. And think about what you're trying to do, and then what are the skills that you would want in order to approach that set of problems.
Right, definitely, great. So the next question we have here is from Mike Lynch Q. Why would this type of robot be better for users than a virtual person on a computer screen?
So this goes back to what we were talking about
initially,
45 minutes ago.
Building that relationship.
Exactly, right? So all comes down to basic psychology, right? Same reason that with a lot of conversations that we have with other people, we prefer to do it face-to-face than over some sort of, video system, right? And face-to-face, you're more engaged, you're creating a stronger relationship. And what we know from a psychological perspective is that carries over into the world of technology, right? The fact that this thing has eyes, and if I just touch her screen, she'll wake up and look at me, right? That actually has a real psychological impact.
Right, and that's much more important being here physically than even somebody on the screen remotely, right? You don't
Yeah.
have that same type of interaction.
Exactly.
Whether
right?
it
Now-
is actually mechanical or a physical person. It
Yeah.
makes so much more sense to be here in person.
Correct. Now, some cases that might not matter, right?
Right.
Let's say, telehealth, right? Great example where you just want to see a doctor and solve some problem right now,
Sure.
right? Doesn't matter. You could do it through something like this,
Right.
through a screen, through the phone.
Right.
But when we care about creating that relationship, right, for
Right.
something that's going to go on for weeks or months or years, having that physical thing then does start to make a
Yeah,
difference.
and it's really impactful. You really see this bond that actually happens between humans and robots. I mean, there's folks. I come from the UAV space, where I've heard that people have used them for reconnaissance missions, and they've been shot down,
Right.
and they've demanded burials
Yeah.
actually for their UAVs because they've
Absolutely.
saved their lives so many
Right.
times that they feel like this is
There's
this
a
is
real connection
A
there.
real connection. This
Yeah.
is a real entity. So the next question here is from this is Kumar Lakshmanan. So I apologize for not pronouncing that correctly. Hi, Cory. I'm an Android developer. I'm also passionate on building stuff like robots and control via devices. So looks like two questions. So what's the course for me? So basically, what would you recommend, given my background? And what will I be capable of completing when I complete robotics?
So, I'd say on the first one, just kind of a quick side note about this, the OS underlying this is Android, right? So we
Okay.
definitely hire Android developers.
So we also have an Android Nanodegree Program that you might want to check out.
Excellent,
We have some great
yeah.
people there.
All right, yeah, we'll be looking for you to apply. So, I think that, people with good, strong software backgrounds is more important than specifically what it is, right? So get good at anything,
Right.
right? And then figure out where you want to apply that. With robotics as an industry taking off more and more, you see companies, like ours and many others hiring more and more people with, strong skill sets at the intersection of robotics and something else.
Right.
Right. So, and the robotics again doesn't necessarily have to be the physical robot, right? But an understanding of how that applies.
Yeah.
Right. And so, if you're an Android developer, that's great. Like that's a skill set in demand at our company.
Right.
Right. And being able to do that and then integrate that with what other people on the team are doing to make interesting and engaging interactions here.
Great answer. So the next question, is from Lily B 423. I'd like to get into the robotics field, but I have a shaky background in calculus and physics. Do any of you have learning resources you can recommend to get me up to speed? And I think we kind of talked about this. You don't necessarily have to be a physicist or an engineer or a mathematician
Right.
or computer scientist. You can have background in psychology. You can have a background. I know Nick Hood from Dash Robotics was here a few weeks ago. Biologically inspired robots. So having a background in biology is very useful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, find what you are good at and what you enjoy doing and figure out how you apply that.
Right.
So I think what we see is, again, robotics in general is being applied in so many different industries. Obviously, we're talking about healthcare here again and some of the things that, that draws upon in terms of skill sets. But, you can see an overlap with almost any skill set being brought to the table for interesting robotics applications now in industry.
Right, I agree. So this next one is from SparkTang. Cory, what do you believe to be the future of robots? Do you believe they will have a personality and look like us, or will they become just machines? This is actually a very interesting question, right? Because I feel like there's this group that wants everything to look ultra realistic, and then there's this other group that feels like just this cuddly, nice, friendly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So getting your take on this is actually, I'm really interested.
So there's kind of two questions there. What do they look like? And there's a very philosophical question of, what's like us versus what's just machine.
Sure.
Right. And I could say what I think we're building out over the next 5 or 10 years is something that doesn't look like us.
Right.
Right. So I don't think that's needed. So there's a few aspects to this. One is just cost. Right. There are a few robots out there that do look fairly humanoid.
Sure.
And they're really expensive to build. Now, of course, with all technology, that'll come down and get cheaper and cheaper.
Right.
But something like this is practical today.
Right.
We're shipping to patients this summer. Right. Whereas if I wanted to build a humanoid robot, give me 5 or 10 years before we're ready to ship that. But the other goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the uncanny valley. Right. Even if we get past the uncanny valley and look completely human-like, really depends on what's that application. What are you trying to solve? What problem are you trying to solve to do that? For the kinds of things that we're thinking about in healthcare, it's not necessary. Right? We don't need to confuse people, right? Or convince them that this is a person. Right? For what we're doing, something like this works really well, right? So one of the arguments for building human-like robots is it makes the interaction more natural.
Right.
Right? And theoretically, I can see where people are coming from, but my practical experience in seeing, at least hundreds, if not thousands of people interacting with something that looks like this
Right.
is that people are really engaged, right? You don't need that extra level to create that kind of engagement.
It's very true. It's very true. So this next question is from James Gopert. Is Maybu using ROS? If not, in general, to what extent have you been able to leverage open source software?
So we're not using ROS here, as I talked about. We're built on top of Android. So there's a little bit of open source in here, probably not a ton of things. We're making some small contributions to the open source community as well, including like the motor driver board. So built on top of the Yo-Yo board here.
Okay.
So and we've contributed back to the open source community a little bit
That's
in
great.
spaces like that. But a lot of what we're doing, the pieces that we bring from outside are things like the speech input and speech output. And for better or for worse, the commercial solutions right now are much better than the open source solutions. The one place we are using open source is in OpenCV. Right. So the computer vision system to figure out, okay, oh, there you are, right? And look at you.
It's a lot faster to use OpenCV for that problem, too.
Absolutely, right? But then we're also, on top of that, using, as I mentioned, Affectiva, right? Which is not open source, right? So drawing from some of the same techniques, right? But they've built a platform on top of that to give us a lot more data.
Definitely.
Right? So there's a mix. More of it's definitely proprietary software, but definitely like open source solutions when we can find them.
Okay, great. So the second question is, how has the experience been with open source with respect to making a product? So obviously you didn't use a whole lot. You used a few libraries here or there. You've talked a little bit about proprietary, usually better fits your needs, but what's been your general response when you've kind of looked at the open source software that you've seen and said, well, this is great, it just doesn't fit our needs, or is it?
Yeah, it's more about the technical capabilities of something, right? We're well far enough along in terms of understanding how, not us at Catalia Health, but just more broadly understanding how open source can be used with products, right? So that's something that's fairly well understood in terms of the licensing side of things today. So not really a big issue, right? 10 or 15 years ago, that was not the case, right? It could be really complex from a legal or licensing standpoint to figure out how you make open source work with a product, but there are a lot of people who figured out a lot of the answers to those questions today.
Great. So this next question is from D. Govender. From an evolutionary theory perspective, eye contact is an important part of storytelling or human-human communication. What other aspects of evolutionary theory are applied to the design of Maybu's interface or communication system?
So yeah, eye contact actually goes beyond even humans, right? So a number of animals, dogs, for example, know how to make eye contact, right? So something innate in many species. That's one of the biggest things that we think about here in terms of just being able to create engagement, right? Now that's not creating the long-term engagement. That's just oh, hey, this thing's looking at me, I have to look back. Right, so there are things like that. Some of the subtle gestures that she'll use when she's talking. That comes away a little bit from evolutionary theory to more kind of modern psychology, right? But enabling a number of those things in here. So that's obviously this person saw that was one of the key things that we're doing in terms of okay, it looks at you, right, and then building a number of layers on top of that.
Perfect, great. And I have one last question for you.
Please.
So, are you hiring?
Absolutely. We're a growing company, so we're about 15 people right now in San Francisco, and really looking across the types of skill sets that I was talking about. Definitely a need for people with a variety of different software experiences. Great if those people have some healthcare experience and have some robotics experience, of course, right? And in understanding how these things want to fit together, and most importantly, have a passion for the problem that we're trying to solve, right? So thinking about how do we help people live happier, healthier lives.
Definitely. We got some great people in our community on our Slack channel. I'm
Excellent.
sure they
look
would
forward to hearing from them.
Be happy to reach out and offer their expertise. So hopefully some of you out there will be working for Catalia Health maybe in the next few months or hopefully a few years down the road when you finish your degree. So it looks like that's it for today's Q&A. If you would like to learn more about robotics, please visit udacity.com/robotics. And don't forget to sign up for our Slack channel at robotics.udacity.com. Cory, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
Thank you.
All right.